Hey, this is Dr. Shannan Crawford, and I want to remind you to make sure that you are working with yourself instead of against yourself. We have many parts of self. Just like you have a skeletal system, you have organs, you have your respiratory, you have your immune system, neurochemicals, you have every system doing its job discreetly in order to create the whole, or the gestalt of every part, creating the whole picture. And when we're in that state of wholeness, then every system contributing, doing its part, then the whole self properly functions. We can see it at a body level. We can see it with every part of your car collaborating so that you have a functioning car. You can see it with an orchestra, the wind instruments, the percussion instruments, that each one is doing its unitary singular part in order for the whole to properly function. Knowing that, it's a great allegory to help us recognize the value in the multidimensional aspects of the soul. There are many types of therapy, many approaches to how people address the soul, whether it's from the psychodynamic, the cognitive behavioral, from positive psychology, DBT, consulting coaching. There's a million different avenues to pursue. And I want to remind you that while all of those are good on an exterior behavior modification level, that there needs to be a layer deeper, that the theoretical orientation below all of those approaches is being able to look at what is it going on inside, not just the development, not just development of neurosis or symptoms or problematic behaviors, thoughts and behaviors, but what is going on internally when a house divided against itself cannot stand. So a big part of restoring self-cohesion model is believing that every part of you has a distinct and valuable role that is supposed to be there. And when we're in wholeness and every part of us is showing up and doing its intended function and role, then they're so fluid you don't even notice a distinction between each part. Kind of like with a perfect symphony, you'd have to really lean in and focus on the percussion versus the violin versus the cello, that every single unique part is so beautiful and elegant in blending together seamlessly. And that's how I see our internal world in health. The problem is most of us have not had a perfect life. I can say for myself, I have not had a perfect life. Not because I don't have amazing family that have done their absolute best, and I'm sure many of you, you've had people who've tried their best, but we live in a broken world where it could be anything. It could be a situation at school with mean kids. I just had a memory come up the other day and realizing, oh my gosh, like some of those bullying situations, or a teacher that was very critical or harsh, or a principal, or a church experience where somebody was too scary or dogmatic and it might have scared your soul. Again, it doesn't mean somebody necessarily did something objectively wrong or intentional to hurt you, but it does mean the soul kind of takes that in, holds and contains it. And that's called the moral defense, where the child knows at an unconscious level that we need somebody to defend and protect us. We need somebody to provide our needs. And so at an attachment level, we then carry and absorb all shame, all bad thoughts and feelings so that it stays underground, so that then we can stay attached to those that we're trying to stay connected to. That need for attachment is so much stronger than food or water or shelter or warm blankets. We need to stay attached. And so part of that is then we absorb all the negative bad feelings that we've had toward a primary caregiver, a principal, a teacher, whomever, when we're very, very young. Then we absorb that shame as if it's our own, as a defense response to protect our view of those primary caregivers. And again, my job is never, ever to get people to turn on or blame or criticize or hold an offense against their primary caregivers, but to just look objectively. These ingredients make this cake. And so knowing that, it helps us to lean into, where do I have some potential unconscious wounds of shame, of fear, insecurity, repressed anger, where maybe there was an injustice that never got properly healed and resolved. And so we learned to hold and contain and turn it inside against ourselves instead of it going out for fear that we would ever be rejected or unwanted. So then we have all this buried junk of trapped emotion, grief, unhealed gangrene or cancer in the soul that's eating us from within. And many people are walking around and we have no idea that all of that is running in the background of our soul, kind of like white noise in the background of the unconscious. And as it's running back there, the soul does its best to defend, deny, suppress, bury, kind of whack-a-mole it down. And eventually symptoms start to kind of leak up, and eventually the person goes, man, why do I feel like this? Where is this coming from? And my greatest joy is to help people not get mad at themselves, to not whack it back down, but to use it as an allegory. That our symptoms are often doing on the outside what the internal world is doing on the inside. And so if we respect and honor the symptoms, then we can put all of that outside of us and start going, if I'm being critical of others, if I'm not trusting others, odds are good I'm being critical of myself, I'm not trusting myself. There may be latent or unprocessed residue from that shame response where I've put it all on myself instead of putting it into relationships. And that happens a lot in marriages, in intimate friendships, in dynamics with a boss or a church leader or God, where we unconsciously revert back to that dynamic of me as bad in order to protect the view of God or authority figure. And then sometimes we'll even feel this negative reaction toward them, like, I don't really like you, or you're doing this and doing that, and don't realize that's some of our own dynamic. And then when we feel that upsurge of anger and dislike and mistrust, a lot of times we immediately have a counter assault already ready in the soul to then shut all of that down. And then that's where that shame comes in. And shame tells us, don't have that reaction. Don't mislike or yell or be angry. That's a bad thing that will cause people to abandon you, reject you. And that fear of being alone and unattached then causes us to protect our relationships by turning against ourselves. And again, most of this is not conscious. These are not things that we're thinking about, but yet are so running in the background of our soul that it's sabotaging a lot of our relationships and our own just mental peace and rest and ability to thrive and enjoy relationships. And so my hope is to come alongside of you and help you recognize this is so common, it's pervasive there, but by the grace of God go I, it's in me as much as anybody else, but yet we don't have to stay stuck there. We don't have to stay stuck in this, I'm mad at you, I don't like you, but I have to tuck all that back in and hide it and then act really loving and people please to make sure that you don't know that unconsciously I'm getting upset. But then all this gangrene or cancer is just growing in our soul of offense and bitterness and dislike toward ourselves because we're not dealing at a conscious level with, one, what is making me feel this way today? And two, what is causing my soul to project or magnify, in other words, turn up the volume of how much it's impacting me? So one, today did happen. We can't invalidate that. But two, odds are good it's also magnified in how much we're responding to it. I can speak for my own self, right? Like that we can get overly sensitive or critical or upset. And when I notice my emotions get above a 1 or a 2, I know I'm being triggered. And the biggest gift I can give you is to recognize when you're being triggered to not act in that. Now, while I say that, I'm not saying to bury it either. I'm not saying whack-a-mole it back down and shut it down, because what that does is then it just keeps it alive and dormant in the unconscious. But I am saying you don't have permission to act out with the people today. That's an extreme of acting out. I'm entitled, you treated me like this, I'm setting a boundary. People use a lot of psychology terms to actually do emotional severs, which are not healthy. Or they just suppress and they kind of digest all that bitterness inside. Somewhere in the middle is this sweet spot of taking time to journal, not react, not bury, but actually start processing, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling like this? What other times have I felt like this? And now starting to bring those things into the light so that one, you process the emotion. Just labeling emotion does not release it out of your physical body. You have to actually release it out of your system. So that means you may visualize the person who originally hurt you repenting and repairing and making it right, what was never made right in the past. And visualize them hugging you, or you attacking them if you need to get the anger out, if you need to aggress in imagination. Let me clarify, none of this is with the actual person. This is for your own grief process. A lot of times it's not safe to go to the actual person. And so we need to clear these things out at the unconscious level so that then you're able to resolve the original wound. And then you can peel apart what is today, what am I feeling that is real and organic just to today, versus what is the turned up volume, the projection of them being bad and doing this to me, versus, hey, we're both muddling through in life. We're doing the best that we can. I don't have permission to attack or retaliate or set these exaggerated boundaries that then make them feel ashamed and in the doghouse. And they're like, I didn't even know I did anything wrong, but now I'm in trouble. That just creates reenactments where you don't realize that the people who hurt you were a model. And without realizing it, you will now do that to your future relationships, where you're willing to be hypersensitive to them hurting you or judging you or misperceiving you. And so then you take control, which then makes the other person feel out of control. And you don't realize that now you're the one that's perpetuating that dynamic in your relationships, sabotaging your future relationships because you didn't go back and resolve the original wounds in the first place. So we don't want to follow into that pattern. That's called a reenactment, where when you stop in your life and go, man, I'm the common denominator of a lot of emotional severs, relationships not working out. I can't maintain relationships for a long time without some drama. While we can always look at the objective situation and go, well, sure, this happened, this happened, this happened. Of course I'm the victim. Of course I had to do that. Or of course I had to step away from that relationship. And while there are some relationships that you do need to step away from, please hear me, there are often so many healthy, good relationships that we are quick to draw and be ready to attack and think the worst instead of think the best. And we want to have a culture in our lives where we're willing to think the best, hope the best about the other person. So many of our relationships get stuck because we can't move past giving grace and latitude that they didn't intentionally do that to us. But if we can't hold that reality, then now this bitter root forms. And the way the brain works is everything that comes in through the sensory organs, whether it's the eyes, the ears, everything gets routed into the thalamus. And so it goes across the corpus callosum, it goes into the thalamus, and it's like a relay station where in the olden days, the like 1950s movies, the lady would say, oh, I'm routing your call, and she'd plug it in where it goes. Everything you experience is buried in your unconscious mind. It's so deep within, it's being interpreted without you having to consciously think through that. We would be so sluggish and not able to get anything done if we were consciously taking every bit of data that comes at us and having to process it. Instead, your brain has tons of schemas or mental buckets. I might call them a template, where male, female, this age, this facial expression, and the brain creates interpretation of what that means in the thalamus. And the thalamus is sitting on the emotional brain called the limbic system. And right next to the thalamus is the hippocampus, long-term memory. Think of hippo like big, long-term memory. So your past experience is right there to filter and misfilter our thalamus. And then right next to that is your amygdala. And I think of amygdala like your fire alarm, your fight, flight, and aggression and freeze, that internal system that when you're trying to apply for a job or you're sitting in front of somebody that you're interested in and your mind goes blank, that means your adrenaline just went too high, your amygdala got spiked, and so then it's like fight, flight, or freeze. Then your brain literally just went offline. It is not objectively interpreting information in that next little lull that the amygdala is firing. So why that matters in our relationships is your thalamus, the little relay station, is not objective. It's sitting in the deep cavern of your brain in darkness, completely disconnected from objective reality and the person sitting in front of you, and yet your past experience, the filters, and your emotions of perceiving things as aggressive and fear and I'm not safe, all of that is filtering your thalamus. So the relay station itself is not objective. It's not accurate. And that's why it's really healthy to step back, process your own emotions. What am I feeling? Where is that coming from? How did I perceive that? Did I take on a role of being a victim and that they are doing this to me, right? Are they the bad guy and then I'm the innocent, where how could they? Versus, hey, we're two adults or we're two adolescents, whatever age you are, and we're both fumbling through doing the best that we can. We're busy, we're overwhelmed, we have a lot of stress, a lot on our plate. There's not an excuse for it, but there is context that for the most part, people are not trying to hurt us. For the most part, we're all doing the best that we can, and all that just kind of gets stored inside, and then we glitch every once in a while, where, you know, the best computer in the world will glitch. The best human in the world, even with the best emotional intelligence, will miss it and not be perfectly attuned, and will be selfish and narcissistic in times. And I'm not saying personality disorder, I'm just saying features, that's in all of us. But if my mental filter, if my framework is based on I'm a victim, then I'm not going to perceive people accurately. I'm going to perceive them through the lens of the past. And if I perceive them through that old lens, then now, without realizing it, I'm going to start reacting to them as if they actually are doing what I think they're doing, and that their motives are why I think they're doing it. And the best gift, again, that I can give you is you are not objective. And when you mind read, which is saying, I know he or she did this because of that. When you mind read to say the motive of why they did that, you're now acting like a psychic. And you're not a good psychic. I am not a good psychic. And I do it as much as anybody else, where I say, oh, you did that because, and I have an emotion behind it, it feels really true. But the problem is we are not just basic computers that transmit data. We also have this fascinating neurochemical hormone processing system of emotion. And there's a negative feedback loop that can happen where the emotion sends a signal and tells the brain, it feels true, so it must be true. And that's a cognitive distortion. It's a thinking error where because it feels true, I feel like I know why he or she just did that. And it feels like this, and so it must be true, and so then I react to them as if they are actually doing that, and that's actually the motive of their heart, which again, psychic, not accurate, but I think that's why they're doing it, and it's based on my past script of how relationships go and how I think people are going to treat me, and before I know it, I'm reacting to them as if they are, and then I hook them into actually reacting the way that I anticipate. And that's called hooking somebody, where you're hooking them into a dynamic relating to you in a way that you actually unconsciously anticipated. And that's a self-fulfilling prophecy where we all do that. At certain times, we are so convinced, I know why you did that. And so I anticipate the motive of your heart and what you're going to do. So then I counter respond by going, oh, I'm not going to let them treat me like that. I'm going to, set my boundary. I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to confront this issue, or I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to retreat. I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt of actually talking to you as a curious human to human. I'm going to believe that I know why you did that. So I'm not even going to talk to you about it. I'm not going to waste my breath. That's not healthy. And yet we do it all the time. Every single day. Human nature is to anticipate why they did it, respond as if they actually are doing it, and it's the motive of their heart. And then we take away their right to be a part of the conversation. And do you know that's doing a ton of damage? Where whether it's you on the receiving end going, why did they just ditch me? Why did they ghost me? Why are they not in my life? Or why are they acting sharp? Or setting these very firm boundaries as if I'm going to cross them, or I'm not a safe person. Why are they getting more snippy or short, or starting to kind of keep things very separate from me instead of fluid and open and trusting? Why am I not a part of that conversation? That creates a lot of damage, and people then respond like, well, that doesn't feel good. So then now I'm gonna pull up all my archives of my past ways to cope with unfair and injustice and not fairly treated. So then now I'm gonna respond. And there's that self-fulfilling prophecy where one or both people are now creating a reenactment, or for short, enactment, where those dynamics are now carried forward into the present. And the hardest thing is, when there's a reenactment, the longer we're in it, the harder it is to get out of it. Because you now can look at, well, look, he did do this. She did spend all my money, or he did criticize me, or they did yell at me, or they did abandon me. See, I knew it. Everybody always does. And it's really hard to talk somebody out of it because it's what they anticipated. And so it's confirmation bias that that's all I'm going to see. That's all I'm going to be aware of, is that they are going to do that. And look, they did. So it's hard to talk somebody out of something when it does happen in the present. The hard thing is the humility to say, man, was I part of creating that dynamic and not even realizing it? Now, I'm not saying that in like an abuse cycle. I'm not saying in toxic. I'm saying like normal, everyday relationships that at first we idealize. You're new, you're special, you treat me so great. You're not like those other people who were critical or harsh or didn't understand me. You're idealized. You're this perfect other that attunes with me and meets my needs there for me, until the person doesn't, which is human. People are not always going to meet our needs. And so then we go, oh, and the template then gets cycled. So that hippocampus filters people through that past experience and our emotions and all the past emotions stored within our physical body that we didn't know we needed to grieve. Now all of that emotion starts surfacing and bubbling up and affecting us in the present. And so I'm relating with this person, again, thinking this is what they are doing. That's the motive of their heart. And very rarely do people actually ask with curiosity and humility. Most of the time when I work with people and I say, well, did you talk to them about it? They go, no, I don't need to. I already know why. I know what they're doing. I know their thought. I look at the pattern of their life. They do it to everybody. It's not just me. And they build this case. First of all, they did not actually talk to that person, right? They mind read. Secondly, they talk to the person in a way that's really unhealthy. So if you come at me with, you did this, and you say a declarative statement, human nature, me included, I'm going to get defensive. I'm going to say that's not true. I have a funny illustration in which a precious dear friend of mine said, Shannan, you turned off the light while I was in the room. And the declarative statement took me off guard because it was like, that would make me a total like narcissistic, unavailable, selfish jerk if I turned off the light while you were in the room. And they were convinced that I was doing it to save money and that I was choosing money over them. And so because they didn't talk to me about it, then it just grew. And there were more situations that confirmed the belief they had about me. And then secondly, then when they did talk about it, it was in a sarcastic, joking way, where it was like, it's a light war. And so the language was so abrasive that I was like, I don't really understand why. And so immediately my defenses are going up. Why is this being joked about? But yet it felt like there was a little bit of an edge. That's what sarcasm is, right? Enough truth, but I'm saying it in a joke. So it's still passive enough that I can say, what, I was just teasing. And so both of those communications were not helpful. And then by the time they actually talked to me about it, it was so declarative, you did this, that immediately I shut them down. I'm like, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, you didn't. Yeah. You know, human nature is to defend your character saying, I did not do that. That's not my heart. That's not my motive. If instead, through the conversation, fortunately, it's a precious dear friend, we were able to talk through it and say, oh, in a very large room, as I was going to bed, my bedtime routine one night, I was turning lights off to get ready to go to bed in this room, and it happened to be a great room that then in this was kind of attached to this room. And so I turned off the light to a great room while the other person was in this room, and I didn't realize they were using the light on that other side of the room. And so when they said, you are doing this, the declarative statement made me defensive. But when they were able to say, hey, you may not realize that you accidentally turned off the light while I was still using that because I was in that room. Immediately, I was like, I'm so sorry. I completely see what you're saying. I was able to validate and attune, and our relationship just went like right online. When before it had been kind of strained, and I didn't know why, because I didn't know this case had been being built against me, and it was becoming this kind of sarcastic, passive-aggressive thing that I didn't understand. And so human nature is then to pull from all the files of my brain going, how do you respond when somebody's being passive-aggressive and unfair, and why are they doing this, and blah, blah. But by talking through it in a life-giving way, which is the alternative I want to give you, that you don't say a declarative, you did this. Instead saying, hey, you may not be aware,